Hey everyone, happy Monday. Welcome to How Digital Content Drives Adoption at Scale. I'm Megan Gilhooly, VP of Customer Experience at Zoomin. Thanks so much for joining us today. For the next hour, we are going to discuss how teams collaborate to create an optimal customer experience. And today I've invited the amazing Adrian Brady-Cesana,
Thank
founder
you.
of CX Chronicles, for a fun discussion. Hey, Adrian.
Hey, Megan, thanks for having me.
Yes, thanks for being here. Just a little introduction to who Adrian is. He's worked in customer experience, customer service, sales, marketing and marketing operations, and consulting for over 15 years. Most recently, he had the pleasure of working in New York with ACV Auctions, Home Team, One Fine Stay, H. Bloom, and other venture capital backed leadership teams. And then over the last 3.5 years or so, Adrian's interviewed hundreds of CXers and customer focused business leaders and has boiled them into some amazing, over 120 episodes of CX Chronicles podcast, which I absolutely love. And it's how I got to know Adrian. And he also wrote a successful book on the CX space, introducing the 4CX pillars, which we're going to talk about in detail a little bit later today. So stay with us and you'll hear about that. And be sure to check out the CX Chronicles podcast at www.cxchronicles.com. All right, so Adrian, how are things going for you today?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for that intro, Megan. I really do appreciate it. I'm pumped to be chatting with you today, as always, and we've got a bunch of awesome stuff to chat with this group about. So I'm excited. Today's going great so far.
Yes, it'll be fun. Good way to start out the week here.
It is a great way. It's a good way to start off the week in terms of just like sharing ideas, figuring out how we can, just there's so many awesome things that businesses are doing today to push this whole space forward that we're going to talk about. I know that Megan is equally as passionate as I am about it. So we hope that we've got a bunch of good things to get into with this group today.
Yeah, it'll be fun. Very good. All right, just a few notes for the audience on the platform. So first of all, we can't see or hear you. Don't worry about screaming kids, barking dogs, any of that. It doesn't matter. We can't. You won't be part of the show. But if you do have a question, and I hope you have lots of questions, please do enter them in the Q&A feature at probably at the bottom of your screen. Make sure when you ask your question, if you wanted to go just to panelists, you can choose panelists. If you wanted to go to the audience as well, so everyone can see your question, then go ahead and toggle that switch to all panelists and audience so that you get to the right folks. And then also we do have a poll that we're hoping is live, and it should be available in the polls section. So go ahead and start that poll or answer that poll so that we can really understand where you guys are at. That will really help us throughout this. All right, let's dive in, Adrian.
Awesome.
So collaboration, we want to start there because
Yep.
we know that collaboration is super, super, super important, especially when it comes to customer experience. So
Yep.
I, as a former content leader, have seen time after time after time when I'm trying to lead the technical documentation team, and let's say a support leader or a marketing leader just doesn't want to collaborate. They want to do their own thing.
Yep.
And the folks that lose out in that situation are always the customers, right?
Yeah.
So what have you seen from sort of the customer experience, customer success world when it comes to collaboration, both good and bad?
Sure. No. So, okay. So I think the first thing that I always talk with people about is CX. Really, it's number one, it's modern selling in today's world. So a lot of companies, they miss this, Megan. They forget that like companies and brands that are focusing on incredible customer experience, they're baking retention, they're baking promoting net new sales into the mix. So first things first, CX is modern selling in today's world. I think the second thing that I immediately say is CX is a team sport. So diving right into this first discussion point of collaboration, a huge part about CX and a big part of the value brought from having a really robust CX team and strategy in your business, it's forcing like the collection and the aggregation and the collaboration of all of these different teams inside of your business to really kind of focus in one side of a group and focus on what that drumbeat of the customer is really kind of saying every single solitary day. The other piece is this. And you know what? You and I were just joking about this earlier this morning, Megan, but it's so common for growing businesses, businesses that are growing really, really quickly, that there's new people coming on every day, new customers coming on every single day. Really easy to just want to build inside of your own little world, build inside of your own little tribe, your own little village, right? Whether it's sales, whether it's ops, whether it's product, whether it's analytics, whatever it might be. But a big part of CX is forcing all those different team leaders to have to listen to the beat of the drum, to have to be a part of a collaborative group that kind of understands what's going on inside of your business, what's going on with your customer needs, what's going on with your product. So that's the second big thing. It's a team sport. And I think a big part of what we're going to talk about today is how do you what are some easy ways that you and your team can think about playing that team sport a little bit more fairly each and every single day?
Yeah, I love how you said that. I really have seen that in the past. I used to talk about how tech docs and marketing were coming together. And
Yep.
most recently, I see there really isn't a big difference between marketing and CSCX, right? Like those two things, yes, they're different groups,
Yep.
but if they are not working in step, then they're not providing the best CX. And we know that to be true. So that's
100%.
really an interesting thing. So now we know that we have to collaborate. And one of the best ways to collaborate is to make sure we have sort of governance or alignment across the various goals that we have and just the things we're going to do. So let's talk a little bit about alignment. So what exactly do you think creates alignment within an organization between, let's say, customer success and marketing and tech docs? And then how do we kind of achieve that?
Yeah. So a couple things. Before we even get into some of the stuff on the 4 CX pillars, I think, Megan, like a big part of modern CX, it really is understanding how to take all those different stakeholders around the table and map the actual journeys, mapping the actual user journeys, mapping the actual customer journeys. To be honest, some of the best companies in the world that are really focused on their EX game or their talent optimization game, they're mapping employee life cycles and mapping employee journeys. And they're literally seeing from the minute they come into the business to the minute that they celebrate some of these big milestones. You see companies like Facebook, Google, Apple, Uber, Lyft celebrating 2-year, 3-year, 4-year terms, right? And they're starting to celebrate Amazon. You're talking about some of these huge companies. They're really relishing the fact that they have folks that want to stay with them for a half of a decade, even longer. Like some of these retention rates in the employee side are crazy. So mapping the journeys is one part. I think the other big part is most companies, if you don't take the time or take the energy and take the team that's required to not only understand what all those touch points are, but to draw lines in the sand. And I think this is why it's important. I say this before we get into the pillars, but if you don't understand areas of accountability, responsibility, and authority across different parts of your team, it's going to be really, really hard to get folks to play together nicely. It's going to get really, really hard for people to understand sort of what the North Star items are within your organization, whether you're running quarterly OKRs or whether you have your big annual goals that you focus on for all 4 quarters, however your business does it. But having those lines in the sand, kind of to what you just said, Megan, that's how you sort of understand how do you even know what you and your team or your department owns in that given experience creation. So just a couple thoughts there.
Yeah, I love that. And when it comes to content specifically, not only knowing where your line is in the sand, but how do you best collaborate with other teams so that you're not reinventing the wheel?
Totally.
So you're not creating inconsistency across the various teams too. So we'll talk a little bit about that later. But
Okay.
why don't we dive into the pillars? Because I think the 4 pillar structure is a really interesting way to really look at sort of any team, but especially to look at a CSCX team. So let's dive into the pillars.
Sure. So first things first, guys, as Megan kind of called out in my introduction, just had an awesome experience of working at a bunch of different startups across a bunch of different industries. So not only was it cool just to see like a bunch of these things started from scratch and getting these big bonfires built and getting these big teams built, big customer portfolios built, got to see that a bunch of different times. But when you see it across different industries, then you start to say, wait a minute, it doesn't matter if this is automotive, hospitality, travel, healthcare. You started to kind of see these similar buckets. So the four CX pillars, Megan, they were really born from, by the time I went through like the 3rd or 4th one of these startup experiences and helping to build and grow a startup, kind of started to realize, wait a minute, these 4 things keep coming back to me. They keep coming back to my teams. They keep kind of giving us like the same sort of looks on specific problems that, to your point, are like not creating something from scratch. You could build on it. You could, wait a minute, I've seen this before at this company. So anyway, the 4 pillars are team, tools, process, and feedback. And I think for the folks listening today, and Megan, you're spot on. Doesn't matter what your business type is, doesn't matter what your industry type is. Having these 4 buckets created a way of just being able to sort of manage all the stuff that was coming at you on the day to day. But let's start with, like, for example, the first pillar of team. Taking time to think about how your team members are hired, how they're trained, how they're retained, like we just talked about. That's massive. Having the ability to understand sort of what your company is going to consider, excellent and acceptable versus what your company needs to get better at. Also, specifically in my world, I was always thinking about how does the CX team itself work with the rest of the business? Because every leadership team and every business has got a different appetite on this stuff. It's as simple as that.
Right.
Some companies are all about keeping CX married at the hip to sales and revenue so that it absolutely drives tomorrow's brand new customers. If you're listening, if you're engaged, and if you're constantly focused on that customer drumbeat that we talked about, you feed that back to sales and marketing on a regular basis. There should be no reason why next month's goals aren't easy to crush, because you're constantly listening, learning, evolving based off of what this month's new customers are saying. Then you get into the leadership piece of team. This is huge. And I mean, look, the people ask all the time, well, how do we just optimize our CX? I mean, one of the biggest places I started is with team. I know on the podcast, Megan, it doesn't even matter what Adrian said, what Adrian thinks. Most of our guests on the CX Chronicles podcast who are running some of these incredible customer experience and customer success programs at like global leading brands, team is the most important pillar that every single one of them calls. I ask this question regularly. I say, which of these 4 pillars do you think is the most valuable or the most? It's constantly team. They always say team, because without having that team, tools, process, and feedback becomes a lot harder to build. So you're thinking about that whole piece as well.
Yeah, it's kind of moot to move on to the other stuff if you don't have your team sort of organized in the way that makes sense and is efficient, right? Or you don't have the right team members. Yeah,
that's 100% right. And then lastly, like, how do you invest in the team, right? Because like when you're thinking about the whole CX side, or when you're thinking about how you're really trying to build an incredible customer experience, I mean, your company's ability to invest in the team that's going to take care of customers really oftentimes carries a big part of the answer, right? Because like companies that build these incredible armies of super happy employees, they have a way easier time of managing a huge portfolio of super happy, super engaged customers.
So true. So true. So team is sort of the first one. I think process is fairly obvious. We're going to get to feedback later, but let's talk about tools, because as you know, Zoom is a tool, right? Yep. And one of the things I find that we do is we bring all these different teams together. So let's talk a little bit about tools. What kind of conversations do you have with folks around tools?
Well, so first of all, on the CX side, it's funny because one of the starting conversation points that you always ask folks is, how do you keep track of all of your customer touch points? It's like as simple as that. Like, how do you know the last 10 phone calls, the last 5 emails, the last 3 text messages? Where can I see all the customer conversations? Now, some companies do a phenomenal job at this. Maybe they've got their CRM completely connected with their issue resolution management system, which is completely connected with their LMS, and everybody knows exactly what they need to look at. Most companies aren't in that position, and most growing businesses, most companies that are really just trying to grow like crazy, they're trying to find the next new customer. That part can be oftentimes pushed to the back, meaning growth and sales and revenue and just building the bonfire. That's the most important thing to so many growth focused companies. But once you actually start growing, and you start growing at a regular clip, now the tools piece becomes a big part of how, from a customer experience and a customer service perspective, it's how you kind of keep the train on the tracks, right? So we spend time with some of our clients at CXC and with many of the folks that we talk on the podcast with, asking about what types of tools they're using, asking about areas of high usage versus low usage so that you actually understand utilization. The other big piece too, you'd be shocked that there's so many companies out there that with their CX and their CS teams specifically, you can go through some of these exercises and you come to find out after just going through a bunch of different questions, some of these teams are using 15 to 20 plus tools. But then really,
I believe it.
And it happened. It's very, and again, going back to cross-team collaboration, everyone in their own little team and department typically has like the go-to set of tools that they want for marketing, and the go-to set of tools that they want for sales, and the go-to set of ticketing tools that they want for customer support. And again, there's not often some of those conversations earlier on the line around, wait a minute, is there like one or two tools that we could theoretically do all of our customer touch point, do all of our ticketing and our issue resolution, and then just make it visible to the entire business? And that becomes a tricky part of it. So a few ideas there on tools. I think the other piece too, Megan, is just as businesses grow and as they surpass different milestones, typically in customer portfolio size, or even on their CS team size, those different milestones typically require different types of toolkits, right? The same type of toolkit that might be perfect for a startup that has 10 people in it and they're only managing 100 customers, it's going to be totally different than a mid-sized company that's got thousands of customers and there's hundreds of people on the team managing it. So thinking about that is another piece of always trying to kind of weigh and understand sort of how you're doing with your toolkit management in of itself.
Right. It's such an interesting discussion. I know you and I have had this discussion just about our tools, and we looked at the internal communication tools, the bug tracking tools, the delivery tools, kind of all of the tools that we touch in a regular day. And then you add to that the number of tools that are exposed to your customers. So for example, I worked at AWS for a while, and when we did a look at how many different customer portals we had out there, we were talking like over 350 customer portals.
Wow.
That's a lot of places for customers to go. And it makes it very difficult for them to understand where the right answer is, what the right brand message is, right?
Totally.
So there's a certain amount of, you need to consolidate that. But at the same time, I constantly talk to teams about balancing the needs of authors who oftentimes have very specific needs for how they write. Your support team wants to write KB articles. They should be able to do that within the CRM they're working in. Your dev team wants to write API documentation, let's say, and they need to do that within a tool that really accepts and understands API documentation. Your tech docs team is writing oftentimes in XML using an authoring tool and a component content management system. Then your marketing team is using a web CMS, which is a totally different monster. So one of the things I talk about is you can't ask your support person to start writing in XML, right? You can't ask your dev person to start writing in, Adobe Experience Manager, let's say, some web CMS, right? It's just not going to work. So finding tools that help pull all of this together and allow you to create a unified experience for your customers without forcing your authors into one tool, I think can be really important as well.
It's spot on, Megan. And then the last piece is just like, if you're building in all these tools and you're not already utilizing some of the data that's left behind from that regular usage, and somebody in the business isn't aggregating that stuff and at least kind of doing a bit of cross-pollination work. And I'm not even talking about anything super crazy. We don't even need to do any type of crazy, analytical optimization. I'm just saying having somebody on the staff who can take, maybe it's 5 major tools you're using, take some of that data in, compress it together, see what types of trends, what types of commonalities you continue to see again and again, and kind of looking for some of those Pareto area, the 20% of things that are creating 80% of the problems, or 80% of the inbounds, or 80% of the tickets, and prioritizing that stuff. It's number one, it's already what your customers are telling you, but as folks that are in Megan's role or my role, people that work with these incredible customer facing teams, that's the same type of stuff that drives customer facing agents mad when they've already been saying again and again and again, look, it's these 3 things. If we focus on these 3 things, and if we can prioritize those 3 product areas or those 3 sales, misalignment pieces, we can make so many people more happy. And that's an easy way of trying to have a quantitative view of where you do need to spend your efforts and spend your limited resources.
I love that. That's spot on. Very, very good. Hey, I want to give some updates on the poll. So far, what we asked in the poll is, does your organization collaborate across teams on the production and distribution of help content? Okay. And by that, we're talking teams like sales, customer success, customer support, tech docs, marketing. And so we have 21% have said yes, definitely, which is awesome. That's very, very good. 58% say yes, but not enough. I'm not surprised that's the majority. and then 21% say no. So it's really interesting to see how even when people are doing it, we don't feel like we're kind of doing it enough. So that's really interesting information. So let's move into talking about how we do this better. And I think one of the places to start is with your CS playbook. So we have gone through the process of building out a CS playbook, but that can be different to different people. So let's talk about what the CS or CX playbook would do. And so sort of give us a definition of how you pitch the playbook and what it is and how it helps us collaborate and align across teams.
Sure thing. So, okay, so number one, I think that Megan, you're spot on. There is a number of different ways that you can kind of classify or consider what a playbook means to your business. I think a big part of the work that we do at CX Chronicles, what we try to do is, number one, we're working primarily with CX and CS folks. Whomever the most senior folks are in a business, where they're already tasked with managing, leading, scaling the customer facing team. Plus, they're the ones typically that are doing the bulk of the talking to the customer portfolio. It just is what it is, whether it's phone calls, emails, text messages, live chat, any of those mediums. Now, for me, a definition of a playbook is, number one, we do use our 4CX pillar methodology, Megan. So we try to break everything into team, tools, process, and feedback-based components. But an example of a small playbook for a small business, it can literally be, if you're Gary the painter and you're a one-person owner, you have four part-time employees working for you, you might have literally a 1 or 2 page playbook that specifies all of the major things that you need to think about with your team, the different tools that you're expected to use for punching in, clocking in, sharing how painting progress is going. Process might just be simple things like time that you start, time that you finish, how to punch in, how to report how painting went that day, right? And then feedback, simple as, what did the customers that you worked with today say? What type of feedback were you able to collect about the work that we did? And then how did your employee day go? That could be a simple, small little business playbook. As these businesses grow, they get way more complex. It's crazy how often we start doing some of our managed service work with clients, and after 10 working sessions or so, they've got 50 pages, easily 50 pages of all of these granularities about team, all of these granularities about the tools that they use every single day to manage their day-to-day and to manage their customer. Then we get into process and we start going through all of these different questions about what type of existing content or what type of existing resources do you have today to do your job really well. A lot of times the answer is, well, we don't have it. Or they'll pull out, Megan, they'll pull out these incredible product content docs and they'll be like, wait, do you mean this whole thing that's somebody already spent the time putting all of the different things that you need to know about using a product, all the different things you need to know about when you run into different challenges or struggles, how to overcome hurdles. And a lot of what we're trying to do is blend some of those resources together, make sure that people even understand where they are in the first place. The other piece is this: most of the venture capital-backed startups that I've been a part of helping to build, and I'm sure folks that are listening to this today will understand, things change so rapidly in this world. Come on, the meetings that you have on Monday in a startup can be so different that on that same Friday, 5 days of time can literally change the entire game. So that's fine. And a lot of people that I've spent time working with and talking to over the last several years, they're going to argue, well, Adrian, playbooks aren't important because things change so rapidly. And my big argument is that's ridiculous. If the team is going to continue to grow and if the portfolio is going to continue to grow, you have to have some type of playbook in place where sales, ops, product, technology, IT, everybody, literally everybody in your business can at least go and have the baseline or the V1 level story for what the business tells customers. Now selfishly for me, a lot of the playbooks that I've built with customers, we are working with the CX and the CS lead. So these people already they're the men and women who talk to the customer more than anybody. They have to do all the phone calls, all the emails, they're doing all the messaging. They got to do all the really tricky phone calls too, by the way, guys. This is the other thing. It's easy for folks that are non-customer facing roles to say, well, just tell the customer we'll get to it next quarter. But if that customer literally tells you every week that when you're doing well, what do we need to do to keep you happier, to keep you longer, to sign the next contract? And they keep telling you, look, it's the same 2 product assets since day one. That's tough for a CSM. That's really tough for a customer facing rep to have that conversation every day and then have no power or no ability to impact the change on that. So with that being said, these playbooks at least help to align everyone across the business and then in the customer portfolio to understand what the simple FAQs are, understand what the simple service level agreements are going to look like when stuff does break down, understanding basic things like timelines internally. So if I'm a CSM and I need products help to fix a bug, if I tell a customer 72 hours, but then it takes double that time, if not, or maybe it doesn't even get touched ever, like it doesn't get touched, like you go back a month later, you realize no one did anything with it. That's hard for a CSM. So playbooks
Right.
outline some of those answers. They provide some of those game plans or those literal plays around how you need to be thinking about it organizationally. And the last piece, Megan, is really just because of how much change and how much evolution and how much just volatility is in these businesses. It creates a place where at a certain point, and every business has a different appetite, but whether it's monthly or whether it's quarterly or whether it's just a couple times a year, you need to get a task force of individuals together to come look at that playbook and see where the updates are, see where the changes are in the business, see where maybe there's things that literally your customers have been asking for a year and you still haven't touched them. And you can highlight those things. And by understanding what some of those different core opportunities are, it leads to that healthy debate, discussion, and eventual action around how to begin making changes and making positive fixes towards the future.
Right. I love that you ended on the healthy debate, because that's usually what it comes down to, right? Everybody has good intentions. No one on the dev team is going out and purposely building something bad. No one on the product team is creating something bad. They all have really good intentions for a great customer experience. But until a CSM comes in and says, well, I know you intended this,
Yeah,
but
right.
here's what our customers are saying.
Yep.
And you have that discussion and that debate about, well, is it that the customer's not using it right? Do we need to educate the customer more? Do we need to change the product? Do we need to change the way we develop with quality? Until you really have that discussion, you don't get a lot of movement. I also like that you brought up the idea of the CSMs knowing how to go out and sort of answer those questions with FAQs.
Yeah.
So important. We're kind of creating self-serve for our CSMs, and that's super important, because the more that customer success managers have to go back to product or go back to dev to ask questions, that's just time wasted, right? And that's bad for the customer and it's bad for the CSM. Now, when we think about those FAQs or the how-tos that you mentioned earlier, we also can think one step beyond that, where the CS playbook can also feed into something that's external facing to help customers self-serve. So exactly. I've seen that a lot in my career, where we'll go back into the how-tos, the FAQs that we're developing, and then we'll say, wait a minute, why do we need a person to be the middle between that and the cut? Why don't we just give that directly to the customer, right? And so that's really an important way. So that kind of brings us to self-service. We do have a question I just want to get to before we sort of move on. So the question is, in your experience, are there any specific tools you'd recommend for creating a customer journey and content map? I know you have one. I think you gave me one.
Yeah, no, there's a ton of great tools out there. I think, like, depending on how big of a business you are, number one, like, you have a tool as simple as Google, which you can literally do most of this stuff in. There's Google Forms inside of it. There's Google process mapping that you can put inside of it. There's obviously Google Docs. Use something as simple as that. If you're trying to do something more advanced, bunch of the clients that we're working with right now at CXC are killing it with Notion. Notion is an incredible tool that allows you to not only do playbook curation and management, but then you do the collaborative task sharing and all of the different, because let's face it, Megan, especially over the last year plus, bunch of us, I mean, many of us, people that have been working in the tech space have already been working remote for many years, so this is not really that different. If anything, it finally gave us an option as to whether or not we want to be physically remote. But for other folks that haven't seen some of this, like, Notion allows you to build all of your playbooks in one place. You can do simplified journey mapping. You can build out a basic view of how you need to look at some of this stuff and share it across the team. And then, more importantly, building these living modules that allow the team to constantly keep expanding on it or building on it or adding to it or revising it or changing it. So Notion's a huge one. I think if you're trying to do really, really robust customer journey maps, one of the tools that we're partnering with at CX Chronicles is UXpressia. UXpressia is awesome. It's funny because back in the day, Megan, I remember telling you this, like when it was a while back, but back in the day, we would have these customer journey mapping days where you would get like a team like Megan's awesome team, and you'd get with Megan and the CSMs, and you would be in the space, and you would take over a wall, and you put all this fun stuff out there, and you get
Yeah.
all these people to bring all their ideas and post-its and all this fun stuff. Then for the last year, none of us have been able to, many of us have not been in that type of working collaborative environment where we're actually at the office together, getting to do this stuff together. UXpressia allows, that's for folks that have listened, that have been a part of journey mapping or journey docking. It allows us to do that remotely. Like, you can sit with Megan and her team remotely. Everyone can be on Zoom. We can be looking and building our journey maps together, sharing different resources, adding to it together. Essentially, instead of doing your stick-it notes, guys, like back in the day, you would essentially, okay, guys, take 30 seconds, everyone add their bullets. So there's ways that you can use tools like that to do it remotely. Those are some nice ideas. And then I think the last big one, though, is just definitely the one thing that I really kind of try to get people to think about, though, is marrying whatever feedback tool. I know we're going to get into this a little bit later, Megan, with some of the feedback questions, but also marrying some of the existing feedback that the business already has. And it can be anything, guys. It could be, you could be using your Google Forms, you could be using Delighted or a fancy tool like Qualtrics to do your customer feedback. But having some of the most recent feedback alongside of that is going to be important too, because it helps sort of guiding what you're mapping and helps guiding what some of the major themes or the major reoccurring areas are that your customers seem to be talking about, whether that's good or negative feedback, by the way. So it's just
Right,
my
absolutely. Yeah, I love that you brought feedback in. We are going to talk about that in a bit. There just are so many parallels between the CX pillars, the playbooks that you're talking about, and how I've always managed content teams. And I think you'll find very similar parallels between almost any team out there. But when it comes to customer self-service, we really think about exactly what you're talking about. What tools are we presenting to our customers? What are the processes they have to step through? How easy are those processes, hopefully? What teams are there to engage with the customers, right? And then feedback is, of course, huge. One thing that I've noticed with feedback from a content manager standpoint is a lot of times we'll get feedback back on content, and it will be, let's say the content is about a policy, and the better we write the content, the more angry people get because they don't like the policy. So I think it can be very hard to get feedback on exactly what you want. Like, you can't just say, give me feedback on this piece of content, because they're going to give you feedback on how it's written, but they're also going to give you feedback on what it's about. Do they like the feature? Do they not like the feature? Do they like the policy? Do they not like the policy? Sometimes people will just put in feedback saying, I need support to contact me. So it's really, people are always looking for ways to give feedback. But let's talk about self-service for customers mostly, but to a certain degree, employees, right? So we want to set up this really rich self-service. We want to make sure we're using the great product content that our teams are building, and we want to be able to surface that in the right place. So one thing I know is most companies don't do this well, right? And we see a lot of this where we go in and we say, oh, well, do you recognize that if they come to this page and do a search, and they come to this page and they do the same search, they'll get different answers, and they go, oh my gosh, that's incredible. So how does this kind of work in with, like, how do you kind of go back to the organization and make sure that customer success and product and everyone is involved around this?
So, okay, awesome question. I think the big thing that I'm always out there really trying to push folks on is two things. Number one, if your business does not already have a voice of customer task force, or selfishly, sometimes I'll call them CX SWAT teams or whatever you want to call it, but a VOC task force, a voice of customer task force. That's one of the simplest things, Megan, that any company can do. You can literally, wave the baton today and it can happen tomorrow. It's so easy. You collect some key folks from sales, some key folks from ops and customer service, some key folks from marketing, some key folks from product, especially the guys and gals that are building this stuff for us every day, or they're building the answers for tomorrow rather. And you essentially make sure that you have a team of people that really comprises the business and gets all of the, because this is the thing, at the beginning of this, when I said that CX is a team sport, even your finance team, who might not think of themselves as a customer facing rep in the business, they still have touch points with your customers, right? There's a bill that comes every single month, right? So somebody's got to do some back and forth. Sure, that bill is sent and that bill is paid. That's a customer touch point right there. Now, hopefully most of the time those are super easy and they go really well, so you don't get a lot of noise on that. But maybe you're a business where payments is a problem and payment does create friction and payment does create issues. On the product side, the other big thing is this voice of customer task force. A lot of startups I've been a part of, Megan, it's very easy for product to essentially, they think that they're hearing everything that the customer's saying. They think that they're hearing everything that the internal employees are saying, internal customers are saying. And I use this analogy regularly, but like they set to work on building out a space land. And the reality is oftentimes the customers, the users, and then the employees that actually have to take care of these customers every day, they literally just want a lamp. They want a lamp that provides light, that makes a room get light so that you can see what you're doing in the room. And some of that back and forth with thinking that there's a need to build a space lamp, when in reality, all you want is a simple, like, pull the switch and turn the light on. That causes a lot of internal friction in most companies and most teams. It causes a lot of those healthy debates that aren't always healthy. And the other part too is it takes, I say this a lot, but it almost is like a distraction. It's almost like an internal distraction where then you start pulling all these valuable resources and all these incredible minds and these really smart people, and they're chasing the space lamp features when the customer just needs light. And I think that a voice of customer task force in any business, it starts to kind of get that thinking in play where, number one, everybody from sales, they already know their top 2 or 3 problems that they deal with every day. Everyone in ops, they already know their 2, 3 problems. Product has to obviously eat a lot of that because we're always coming to them to figure out how they're going to help us fix it. But that voice of task force is one of the easiest ways that you can begin to balance and prioritize what the customer's saying. Now, obviously, once you start getting good at sort of seeing this reporting, you start having quantitative and qualitative views on what customers are saying, good, bad, and ugly. Then you have to work with your leadership team to figure out what really you can afford and what do you think, which ROI do you think is going to actually produce the biggest bang for your bucks? Maybe there's some product features that leadership already knows there's not going to be a positive ROI there. You can't spend that money. You can't fix that thing. It's not going to happen. But maybe there's other things where this voice of customer task force, it continues to show month over month over month. Hey, those 2 product fixes that are actually very simple, we could probably bang them out in one sprint. That might actually reduce our ticket. It might reduce our ticket count. It might increase our customer satisfaction. And then it might increase our employee experience satisfaction, meaning our agent happiness around how people are feeling about not having to deal with the same problems day after day after day with no fixes.
Right. Yeah, that's a great example. And, product has to be really lockstep with the rest of the organization. I actually have an example from Amazon when I worked at seller support, where I basically started a voice of the customer team. Luckily, I was at Amazon, so we had all kinds of ways to go out and get customer data that most people don't have, right? So we're very lucky in this way, but we were able to get really, really detailed feedback on how people felt about content specifically.
Okay.
And we looked at it according to 4 pillars. We looked at helpfulness, we looked at accuracy, we looked at consistency, and we looked at engagement. And that's how we determined we are going to identify where there are gaps and what was successful and that kind of thing. So we asked 13 questions over 13 weeks, and then we kind of correlated it in the way that Amazon does, bring it all together into a customer trust index. And what we found was the biggest loser was consistency. And so we then took that and said, okay, well, why? Why is that the biggest loser? And we were able to really dive in and find out that the reason customers were not trusting us was because our help content said one thing, and our support agents were saying another. And that was a huge trust buster, right? So we were able to dive in and figure out the root cause of that and fix the root cause. And it's amazing how quickly it turned around. So I can't say enough about that. And being able to work directly between the doc team and the support team is so vital. Again, back to that collaboration and alignment, so vital to making that self-service happen.
And to add to that, one more piece and spot, like, such good stuff right there, but to add on to that too, like, you know, there was a recent Genesis report that talked about how 29% of consumers, they're going to rank first contact resolution as the most important part of customer service. Now think about everything that Megan just said, guys, where you need to have like this knowledgeable team. You need an agent and a rep that knows how to answer those questions or provide like not only a thoughtful answer and response, but they technically to keep that customer happy. And if we're running with that metric of 29% of consumers ranking first contact resolution as the most important part of service, you have to have the answers. You need to have that content or that FAQ internally to be able to provide. And then here's the other thing, as you're going through different flows of that customer live, I don't know how many folks on this call have actually spent parts of their career doing 30, 40, 50, 80 customer calls a day, running, customer after customer after customer through this stuff. It can be, number one, it can be really difficult. Number two, there's good days and bad days, just like any other role. But like that specific role, you get a lot of the negativity, right? You're getting a lot of the inbound where things aren't going so well. So the second biggest thing, though, that this Genesis report called out for the consumers, and this is important for us customer-focused business leaders to think about, a knowledgeable representative comes in at second at 18% on this same Genesis report. So modern consumers are literally expecting leadership teams, and they're expecting modern brands and modern companies. You guys built the thing. You should have the answers. You should know the flows. And then the other thought, too, is if you're already working with all these incredible customers, yeah, fine. There's going to be one-offs in every business in the world. There's always going to be one-offs. But if you're not the type of business that's listening and learning from managing those same inbounds every day, and then just getting better at the responses and getting better at building an army of informed agents to work with those customers, that's on the business. And I think that those are things that really you can start small. You don't have to, we're not saying that you need to like build your VOC task force, build your reporting and, overnight. This stuff takes time. And frankly, for businesses, it requires a bunch of smart people across a bunch of different teams and departments internally to spend months thinking about what this can actually grow into and what type of roadmap you want to lay out there to make sure that you're being a super successful customer-focused organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first response you talked about, that doesn't even always have to be a person, right? We do this all the time. We have a customer who reduced cases by 40% altogether by just surfacing product content right there where their agents were already there and their customers were searching for stuff. So instead of going to an agent, they just went to content that answered their questions. So if you can reduce 40% of your tier 1 cases right off the bat, that's huge, right? So that's so important. And again, you don't get there if you think, let's create our own KB articles all the time, right? Yes, you need to do some of that, but you also have to think about what's already out there that we can tap into and we can move very quickly and surface right where our customers are. So I love that. A couple more questions coming in. So one is, how can we get management to prioritize collaboration between customer success and content teams and other teams? Is there usually, there is usually little time for this to reach the top of company priorities. That's really interesting. So basically, how do we get executive buy-in to make sure we have this collaboration across? You want to go first?
I mean, my big thing is this. I think what I've learned after working with a number of different executives and then just working across a number of different businesses over the years, where I typically start, Megan, is I think businesses need to think about building their version of a customer feedback digest. Because here's the bottom line to that question. For most executives, it's really hard to care or focus on this stuff when their worlds are changing so rapidly. There's constant pressure, there's constant demand. If we think that our worlds have a lot of pitches and pivots, you should see what an executive's world looks like, because they're constantly getting new information, trying to reevaluate it. Plus, they've got, in some cases, they got hundreds or thousands of people that they already know. They're gonna have a bit of that change in it as well. So like my first thought is this: customer feedback digest. I think you have to get good as a business at compartmentalizing the different tranches of feedback. It's really important, because if you're still in a position where all you really can do, let's say that you can muster up 100 pieces of customer feedback a month, but there's really not any afterwork being done to stratify and to compartmentalize. Okay, on the 100 pieces, here's the 20 pieces that's perfectly relevant for sales and marketing. Here's the 20 pieces that's perfectly relevant for operations. Here's the 20 pieces that goes right to product and our CTO so that he or she can start working on that immediately. And then here's the 20% of things where it's like nice to haves. It's going to be literally where your future upsell, cross-sell, and product expansion opportunities come from. Things that you like maybe even haven't thought about it yet. A customer says something that right perfect way where you're like, wait a minute, we can actually build that into another offering that we can actually sell and charge money for. So customer feedback digests, I think, are huge. I think the second piece is this, Megan, a big part of the work that we do early on at CXC with our clients is to understand company. And I know this sounds cliche. I know that people are going to roll their eyes when it says, but if you don't have an understanding on company mission and core values, and if there actually aren't a couple of just true North Star, whether you're the CEO or whether you're the most junior individual that just got hired into the business, if you don't know the 3 or 4 reasons why your business exists in the first place, and you don't know why you're here and why this thing was built and why people come to work on it every single day, to be honest with you, it's hard to get executive buy-in if some of that feedback isn't striking on those North Star ideals, right? You need to kind of have that connection already built. The last thing is this: executives pay attention to numbers that they can trust, and they pay attention to reporting that they can trust, and they pay attention to some of these things if there's both quantitative and qualitative value, period. So again, there's you hear some people saying, well, we tried to build NPS, or we tried to build customer satisfaction, or we tried to build monthly customer experience scoring, and it didn't go anywhere. And a lot of why that doesn't happen, Megan, it's because, again, you need to tie all of those things together. So one hand of it's knowing how to deliver some of that feedback back to the right people internally. The other part of it is compartmentalizing it. The other part of it is looking at it as a performance-based way, so you can see month over month how your business or your team seems to be doing. And then I'd say the last thing is this. I'd say the last thing is, look, if organizations aren't interested in collecting feedback, it's oftentimes it's related to they know that they're not going to have the ability to necessarily do anything about it. And the example that I usually use is, you said, we listened, or some companies do an excellent job, like companies like Airbnb, Uber, Apple. They do incredible jobs of kind of saying, hey, over the last 30 days, we got all of this customer feedback across X, Y, and Z. Here's what we did with it. And I think what happens is a lot of times for executive teams that maybe are already pinched and they're already strapped and they already don't have enough resources, it can be hard to want to invest in yet another thing when you know you're not going to be able to really do anything. And I'd say most executives out there, they already know that, like, your ability to respond to what the customers are saying equals that magicness of like, hey, that company gets me, or that brand listens to their customers, or that brand, they listen to their employees who understand all the customer answers. So I think it's a long-winded answer of saying it's a combination of things, Megan. It really is. You need to collect that feedback. You need to assess that feedback. You need to aggregate that feedback across the business so that it actually gets pointed towards the right people. And then there needs to be consistency in that reporting. You need to see month over month, quarter over quarter, regular reviews. The other thing too, every business, we're bombarded with information. We're bombarded with numbers. We're bombarded with reporting. So comfortability and consistency with your customer feedback digest, that's another key. It could take, even at excellent companies filled with super smart people, it could take 3 months just to get directors and VPs eyeballs, right, even just wired into how you're trying to show them the good, bad, and the ugly on the buy side, or the good, bad, and the ugly on the sell side, whatever your business looks like. So it takes some time and consistency to get that into stride.
Right, absolutely. So I think you covered all of it really, really, really well. I want to just clarify one thing to make sure everyone understood. When you say when you're talking about the feedback digest, you're talking about disseminating the right information to the right team so that they can take action, right?
100%.
So, and I think that's super, super, super important. That's one of the best ways to get everyone aligned, right? Because if customers are coming in and saying that they can't stand the color blue and everything you have is blue, well, then your marketing team has to go change the website, and your people dealing with Jira need to make sure there's no blue on whatever, you can come up with silly examples, but you have to know what those are, and then you have to know how that impacts all the different teams. One of the things that we've done that has worked really, really well is we have this 2x2, which basically has 4 quadrants, and we
Okay.
only get one page to say the most important stuff, because otherwise you could go on for 10 pages
Yeah.
about all the complaints coming in and all the good stuff coming in, and but you have highlights, lowlights, voice of customer, so just some quotes that are coming in, and then what are those ongoing issues that we're continually going on. So you can do something as simple as that using your voice of customer data. I also really like what you said about the executives needing to set the North Star, because we can get voice of customer, and sometimes we can get detractors that are detractors for reasons that are outside the scope of what we do, right? If they're detractors for something that we're not there to fix, then we're not going to pay special attention to that. We're going to find out, is there a way we can turn this person into promoter by educating them so that they know that that's not really why we're here or whatever, right? So I think it's super important to have that North Star, to set that. And if your management hasn't set that North Star, if they haven't done the vision and the mission, and they don't have the right values, or you don't know why you're doing it, then that's a different question to ask. You can't just dive into, let's think about customer success and voice of customer if you don't know where you're heading, right? So
100%. And Megan, I think one thought too is like, even if you're not in the position of where you can make that call, even let's say that you're in a position where you're sitting in a CSM role, or you're sitting in an AE or an AM role, and you're working with customers every single day. Megan's point right there of like, even just being able to take, you do have control of understanding what you do differently with promoters versus detractors. For example, let's say that you've got in your portfolio today, you get 10 pieces of monthly feedback, right? Maybe you have 100 customers, you only get 10% of them actually giving you feedback. So that's another thing right there. It's hard just to get feedback in the first place. But maybe eight of the 10 respondents were excellent promoters. So that you do have control here. You can follow up. Hey, thanks so much, customer. Really appreciate that that feedback that you gave me. Already shared it with Megan, my boss, so she knows how well of a job I'm doing managing you. Maybe on the 2 detractors though, that's a follow-up phone call, right? And maybe that's the type of thing where like you're following up saying, hey, I saw you just gave us this low score. What gives? Number one, like, what do I need to do differently to make that better? Number two, to your point about controllable versus uncontrollable, Megan, really great companies that are like getting like completely into the weeds here with some of this understanding of like what causes churn. They do know the difference between controllable churn and uncontrollable churn, both quantitative and a qualitative side. Like they already kind of think about it and measure it that way. The other piece too is with uncontrollable churn, you do need to start talking with sales and marketing, because that oftentimes can go back to, hey, what's our ICP here? What is the ideal customer profile that we should even be saying yes to and getting ready to partner up with and bring on board? So there's a number of different things that you can really kind of bake into the day-to-day ground game on your CX and your CS side.
Yeah, absolutely. Very nice. One last question. Maybe we can do this in short, because we're getting a little short on time. What would the CX playbook you're talking about look like?
Okay, so a couple things. Number one, for the sake of time, I think if you think about the 4 different pillars, team, right? You start going through with something. Imagine that you have your VOC task force built today, right? You got one person from sales, one person from ops, one person from product. Ripping through team and getting some of the basic questions for what are the positions that we even have in this business on the pitch? Because those are questions that not only do you internally, your employees need to know, those are parts of the story that you should be able to easily communicate to customers. If customers don't know that who's playing offense, who's playing defense, who's playing midfield, that's a little bit weird, because they're going to have to work with some of these people at some point throughout that customer journey. Again, every business has these different teams touching different customer touch points. So you're getting all the answers on the actual internal team that you have, just so you can even report back how to point them right to the right direction, or what people are doing inside of a business, what my role is versus your role, what are the differences, how I can help you versus how my teammates can help you. So that's one part. On the tool side, this is just with how frothy all these SaaS tools are out there, and with so many companies just wanting to sign up the next tool after tool after tool after tool, you need to have a master tool list. Meaning, like, if it's expected that your team is going to work with those 20 tools that you've signed up on, there has to be some type of a guide for what the 20 tools are, when you're expected to use them, what their primary purposes are, when you need to manage up, and maybe you don't even need to touch that tool, and it's just something that Megan and her team needs, right? So understanding all the tools. The other piece is this, understanding which departments those tools tie to. Because as an agent, when you're the one that's managing a bunch of inbound customer phone calls or emails every single day, kind of traffic control is a big part of being good at that job, guys. Like literally just being able to hear something and then know that you need to sort of delegate it over to finance or push it over to product, or ooh, I need IT involved in this one. So like understanding kind of what tools teams are using is another part. On the process side, Megan, this is some of the traditional stuff. This is understanding role by role metrics for success and KPIs. What are the key performance indicators across role by role? So you have a basic high level understanding of what each function in the business is doing. This is also where you get into the fun stuff on performance management with dashboards or visibility around how a different team is doing. Maybe in a CS world, it's tickets completed or issues resolved or time to resolve an issue, or maybe it's keeping your high severity tickets as low as possible and kind of really all the bulk of your tickets sitting in a middle or a low severity range. And then if it's sales, it's obviously number of customers that you're working with, or LTV, or revenue, or who's upselling, who's cross-selling. Is there churn that you need to worry about? So measuring and managing those things. And then on the feedback side, I think there's a couple different things for your specific business. Everyone in the business should have a basic script and a basic understanding for how you collect feedback, right? Because guys, when I say how you collect it, it can be a number of different things. Maybe you're doing surveys, NPS, customer satisfaction, customer effort scoring. Megan loves customer trust scoring, for example. Product satisfaction, right? For all of our folks that are listening that are product people right now, we can do quantitative and qualitative scoring on literally the feature that you guys just released in last week's sprint. Then there's some other fun ones. Like Megan, you and I were just chatting about this earlier, but like don't undervalue the power of focus groups or continuing to do dialed voice of customer calling campaigns. Maybe you call 100 customers with the exact same 4 questions. And maybe 2 of the questions are quantitative and 2 of the questions are qualitative. Now, maybe you just gave your executive team, like maybe whatever the hot button topic is this week, rip 100 phone calls with those 4 questions, 2 of them qualitative, 2 of them quantitative. You just provided a perfect sample on a specific range for your leadership team to add into that healthy debate. And then the last thing is it's in person, right? It's constantly thinking about how to leverage the in person. So there's a number of different, it's really, and for the question there, it's a matter of putting all of this stuff together in one place where your whole business, your whole organization can actually see it, add to it, revise it, and evolve it into the future.
Very nice. So that was a really detailed account. That was awesome. And I think just to add to that, it can be in any tool that you want it to be. It can be a Google Doc. It could be in Confluence. It could be in whatever you use for knowledge sharing, right? So pick what works for you, but cover all the stuff that Adrian just talked about. So we are getting close to time. So I just want to kind of wrap up. I want to make sure, I think the biggest takeaway that I have, I'll go first, and then I'll ask you the biggest takeaway you had. I think the biggest one I had is really the idea of building this consistency internally to help ensure that you're providing consistent information externally, whether it's through agents or through some sort of self-serve, like product content being surfaced at the right time. But really thinking about how you're operating efficiently and effectively with all your tools and processes and team, and then getting that feedback to ensure that you've set the processes, the team and the people up effectively, right? So I think that feedback becomes a loop back to say, did we actually do the right thing? So yeah. I love all that. What was your big takeaway from today?
I think my number one, thank you so much for having me. It was an absolute pleasure. I love having these conversations, and I love talking with other people that are equally as enthused as all the opportunities that companies have to get better at this. There's over $70 billion a year lost by US companies due to poor customer experience. 70 billion just in the US, right? Globally, it's an even bigger number. And I think my biggest takeaway is like, it takes customer focused business leaders like Megan and all of you to, if you and your team has the answers, or you've got some of the puzzle pieces that will get you to the eventual answers, you got to be constantly vacuuming that information, sharing it so that tribal knowledge becomes something in your business or your team where people learn from one another constantly, right? They're always learning from one another. And then the last piece is this. there's empowerment to your team, right? For the best teams in the world that give their A players the ability to own these playbooks or to own this technical documentation or to own this content that's then going to be used for everyone in the business and outside of the business. That's a pretty cool place to be. Most folks that are on teams, they want to be there. They want to be at that table and they want to be helping to come up with those answers. And especially if they're talking to the customers every day, they're vested in being a big part of figuring out how to do that. Really. So that would be my big takeaway for today.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, Adrian, thank you so much for joining me. This was super fun. Sorry if I'm losing my voice. I hope everyone got something out of it. Thanks to the audience for coming to watch. We'll do this again, I'm sure. Check out some of the stuff Adrian's doing. If you want to connect with me, I'm on LinkedIn, Megan Gilhooly, and you can also email me at megan.gilhooly@zoomandsoftware.com. If you have content needs for delivering content from multiple sources, definitely contact me. I hope everybody has an amazing week and we will see you again.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.